Welcome to the fifth chapter in rebuilding our 351 Cleveland. Now in this one we spend quite a lot of time on dialing in the camshaft, and I did about an hour's footage on this and pulled probably 15 minutes of it or so, 20 minutes maybe, to include in this. Now the most important thing I reckon when dialing a camshaft in is to take measurements and then quantify them with other measurements. So set the cam up on the intake centerline method, which is what comp recommend, and then wind it through its stages to see when valves are opening and when they're closing, just to, quantify your work, just to prove what you've done is correct. The important thing to remember though when you're dialing a camshaft in is it's pretty easy to do, but it's even easier to make a mistake, and so you need to take a lot of care when you do it. Now the XW is a Windsor, a 351 Windsor, this is a Cleveland. They both use Rollmaster billet timing sets, and they're both set up, I think the XW is, 1 degree advanced on the cam. Now I did this a couple of times. I set it up straight up and there was a few discrepancies in what I was seeing, and so I set it up as 1 degree advanced on the cam, which is 2 on the crank, ended up being perfect, within half a degree of everything on the cam spec card. The other thing you need to be mindful of is understanding the cam card. So understand when the valve's open. Some manufacturers recommend checking lift at 50 thousandths. Comp here, they wanted it at 6 thousandths, and I got caught with the discrepancy until I really read that camshaft card properly. So there were little hiccups along the way, but I got it nailed in the end. We also talk a little bit about the oil pump, putting it on, clearancing everything, all this sort of stuff. And it's important also to consider, and I got a bloke commenting on the Windsor build that I shouldn't have bothered CCing it, but of course I changed compression height with different pistons and all sorts of stuff. These engines now are old, but we're only using really the crankshaft, rods and block from the original engine, and so everything else is non-genuine and aftermarket and so forth. So there's going to be measurement discrepancies, there's going to be all sorts of things that weren't in the engine when it was built, so we need to measure everything and be absolutely sure it's correct. So this is about half an hour, I think. It's a slow process. I'm going into more detail with this XC, and particularly this engine, because I want to make sure I've got things covered. If you want to leave comments, please do, and I'll do my best to respond. After this, in the next episode, I've got to get some valve springs for the heads. We'll CC the cylinder heads and put them on, and then we can sort of dress it and, paint the engine and do the nice stuff then. Anyway, hope you enjoy it. Okay, so we've got to start timing this thing now, and the timing set of choice here is the Rollmaster Red Series, and I've gone with this, well actually I always go with these, because they have a reputation for being sort of at the top of their game. They're around they're around $140 or something like that. Most timing sets for these things are sort of $80-90. I pay a bit more for these ones. And of course it comes with its own little leaflet. And there's a lot of information on here that, like anything, is crucial, because they also come with a washer there. Now, I've got to think about this. Some engines use those and some don't. This is a 9 keyway, so we can dial the camshaft in properly. And of course, for every 2 degrees we advance on the crank, does 1 degree on the cam, because it's sort of 1:2 ratio. I'm going to pop this open. So I'm just going to put this kit on. I should be doing this on the workbench, but I'm not. Just going to pop it on and set it up straight up to begin with, and we'll go from there. You can see on here you've got your 0, -2, -4 and so forth, +2, +4. Now you can run on high performance applications, you can run a bit of retard there, and what that'll do is it'll move the power curve further up. Of course if you run a bit of advance it pulls it down, so it's better for sort of straight off the line and low end torque sort of applications, but that way you don't get all your top end. But at the end of the day, a little bit of advance doesn't hurt, because it'll make up for any stretch in the timing gear, in the timing chain I should say. But for now we're going to set it up straight up. And as I said, I'm just going to go straight up, which means, and I've got that roundabout where I think top dead center is, that's on the top, but as we said before, it doesn't mean it necessarily is on the top, and that just goes all the way home. There's a sort of a radius or a chamfer on the inside that makes up for this part here, so we have to make sure we get it all the way home. And the other thing we need to do is make sure that this is perfectly lined up with the camshaft one, not canted out. I had an FE big block like that once, and I don't know how the heck it didn't break. So I spin that round. I'm just going to get the bolt. Of course, we're also using a new ARP cam bolt. Just going to cut that loose. And also there's an instruction set there as well. So I'll take this out. And because we're playing with an engine, and engines are particularly fussy, we're going to read what the instructions have to say. They're just your torque settings, and of course it goes into the type of bolt. That looks like a 3/8 course, and of course that would be 45 foot-pound, which is what Ford recommend for them anyway, so that's alright, that's cool. Rightio, so what we can do is we can look at it, it's on 0 there, and I can just sort of move the chain over either way. I've just got my thumb through there just to hold it. It should go on around about there. I've got the camera on a funny angle because I really need to be dead on with it to see what I'm doing. And of course, it is a bit tricky sometimes, so I need 3 hands. But I'm just going to pop that in there for now just to hold it so it doesn't drop. And with these, you need to make sure also they make mention of the oil gallery bosses up here being possibly interfered with by this set, because it does it is wider than the standard sort of set, if you know what I mean. So I'm just going to persevere with this and try and get it on. Right, so if I run a center line, if I run a ruler, through the center line of the crank and camshaft, we should line up with these two dots, 0 degree and that dot there. And then we know it's timed, or straight up as they refer to it. That's nice, that's good. The other thing we want to do is put some of that goopy cam lube all around it before we do a final torque and that sort of stuff. So there's more yet. Right, so the way that's set up, that is going to start and run well. That won't be an issue. Now the reason we use a degree wheel and muck around with these, you know, the possibility of using one of these other increments here, is to make sure that everything happens on the cam spec sheet that's supposed to happen within the rotation of the engine. So the intake valve opens at these degrees, it closes at these degrees, the exhaust valve opens, and so on and so forth. So without that, this could actually be out. The straight up looks good, but it might be out, and it might not make the engine produce as much horsepower and be fuel efficient as it should. Now we need to find true top dead center, and of course I'm using this piston, it's already in the engine now, but I've filmed this beforehand. And so when we look at our piston and we think of it going up and down inside the engine like that, we get to the top and that's top dead center, but it might not be true top dead center, it might be a few degrees either side. So in order to get true top dead center, we need to use one of these little blokes, the degree wheel. Now, there are 3 reasons why we need true top dead center. One, of course, is to dial the camshaft in. Another reason we want to do it is we want to find out exactly how much volume is in the engine by using a fluid to CC it. This engine's been decked, it's got a slightly bigger swept volume because it's 20 over. The compression height might be slightly higher because this is a non-genuine piston. Also the cylinder heads have been ground, they might have been ground 5 thousandths or 65 thousandths, I have no idea. So I need to work out compression ratio. And of course the third reason we need to use one of these is to mock it up on true top dead center and see if the top dead center mark on the balancer marries up with the pointer. So that will make timing and that sort of thing a lot easier later on. So we need to put this little degree wheel on now. So I'm just going to put the crank bolt through it. I'm going to put another washer on the back just to protect it a little bit. And screw it on. So it's straight up. And then I'll fashion a little pointer just off one of these things just to point directly on where I think top dead center is. And then we'll find out for sure where it is. So I've set this up where I think top dead center is. This is a Summit Racing degree wheel. Of course, it's got other holes around here so it can be mounted onto an engine in a car, onto the sort of harmonic balancer and that sort of thing. Now, this is my brother's kit. I never used this before. But you don't have to buy them. You don't have to sort of spend a lot of money on a degree wheel. I made this one years ago and it's just downloaded from Machinery Cleanery. The important thing to remember with these is just mount on a bit of plywood. I've used this quite a lot and it's very, very simple to read. And of course, the thing you have to bear in mind with these sorts of things is they're divided into 4 90-degree quadrants, which makes them very easy when you're timing stuff. But at the same time, you have to think of it as a 360-degree sort of wheel, so you have to add bits on every now and then when you use those. But that's the one I've been using before. But normally when I use it, I borrow a dial indicator from work. But my brother had this one, and it's got a whole kit of that includes all that sort of stuff. Anyway, now the point is just made from some sturdy wire. Don't use flimsy wire with that. This is sort of hardened wire, and that way, because if you knock it, you know, you don't want to sort of put it out of kilter or anything. One thing that's very good to use are these coat hangers. This is a powder coated one from the dry cleaners, of course. These are hardened steel, and they need to be, otherwise your clothes will just fall off. But you can sort of just cut a bit off, sort of sharpen in the grinder so you get a nice clean pointer, wrap it around a screwdriver and just bolt it to the block. Coat hangers are a very, very good thing to use for your pointer. Right, well, I've got it on top dead center. It might not be accurate. I don't care much because now I'm going to make sure it is accurate. And to do that, I'm just going to wind the piston down a little bit. That might come off. I might just take that off actually. And we're using just a couple of head bolts. Normally the degree procedure they talk about in the book always talks about doing it with the cylinder heads on. There's just a bit of metal with a bolt hanging through the bottom of it. And I'm going to put that in here. The idea being, of course, that the bolt head is going to stop the piston coming up to the top, and I can take a reading with that. Okay. So I'll wind back, I'll wind forward, sorry, until the piston stops, which is there, and that's right on 20. Now, it's actually not. It's 20 and a half. I'm just going to put a little mark in there with the whiteboard marker so I can wipe it up later. These are worth having. You can just wipe them off. You don't have to use solvent or anything. It's pretty easy for me. I'm a school teacher. I've got 1,000 of those things. Now I'm going to come back all the way, making sure I don't hit that pointer to when the piston comes up and hits the other side. And she's chasing it now. We're almost there. Okay. Okay, so we've got 10, 15, we've got 17 and a half. And we've got 20 and a half here. Right, so what we do is we add those two up. So 20 and a half and 17 and a half is 38. And then we take an average, so half of 38, or at least divide that by 2, is 19. So we need to go back 19 degrees. I'm just going to take my stop off. And we go back to 19 degrees, so 7.5, that would be 2.5. That would be there. So it's like 1.5 degrees to the right of that. So what we need to do now is just bend that pointer to the 0, because that should be right where true top dead center is. So if I rub these numbers out now I'm going to do it again. So I'll put the stop on. So then of course now I've got true top dead center. I just want to check it, so I'll do the procedure again just to make sure we get an equal number either side. Right, so I've got a couple of nice shiny new lifters. I'm just going to put a bit of lube on there. Now you're supposed to use a solid lifter for doing this, and so using a hydraulic one's a bit of a no-no, but at the end of the day I'm going to set up my dial indicator on the edge of it, not in the centre, because that hasn't been pumped up yet, it's never been used. And so I'm just going to set the dial indicator up on the edge. And another thing to think of when you're doing this sort of stuff is to make sure, whatever you do, to keep the dial indicator, that's going to actually be quite hard, to keep the dial indicator sort of in line with it all. So they're in there, they're both on the base circles, because on top dead centre the pistons come up, there's got a full charge of fuel and the spark plug's just gone off, so it's about to fly down the barrel. Bit of a pain in the neck going through all this, but it just means it'll be set up the way I want it to be set up, nice and true. That's just a crank bolt with another crank bolt washer underneath it. So put them down to one side. And I'll undo this and I can just slide that off. These are buggers to get off because they've got to be dead square. Just getting it initially started was a real headache. I didn't lubricate all this with the cam lube to begin with because I knew I'd be taking it off again. But now I can all set it up properly, lubricate it and all that sort of stuff. as well as the chain. I'm running out of this stuff. And there's that nitrided little shim that came with. And of course we've also got to lubricate the chain as well. And that sits in a little rebate on the back of the gear, so you've got to be really careful you get that all in the way it's meant to be. And this will help sort of protect it a little bit in its first start up and all that sort of stuff, and all that sort of stuff. I'm just going to make sure that shim doesn't slip out, because it did when I first installed this. That pointer's in the way, so of course now I'm just going to feed that over, and I'm out, so I've got to move it over a bit. I reckon that's about it there. And it just slid on, which is all good. And that's positive too. I'm just going to make damn sure I get this right. And then of course we've got to find true top dead center. We've got to go through it all again. I won't show all that because I've already sort of gone through all that. But I just want to make it sort of known what I'm doing. Now, this is mirroring exactly what the XW did. I mean, run a degree of cam advance on that. And even if, look, if somebody's watching this and said, no, you got it all wrong, I doubt it, but if they do, well, I don't care, because the XW, I still haven't grafted Dizzy or put the 4-barrel on, and it's starting to hammer along now. It's all run in now, so it's good. Anyway, I'm sliding all over the joint here, so I'm going to just turn the camera off and just snug that down a bit. And just before I fully snug it down, I'm just going to make sure that little shim is free, which it is. That's good, because it sits in a very, very shallow rebate on the back of the gear. So I'm just making sure I've got it properly central. There we go. Which I think that is now. So that's all good. So now I can run another check on it. I'm just going to do this very roughly. I'm right on the money. That's good. Happy with that. Okay. So, to attain true top dead center, we have our degree wheel. We put a mechanical stop on, rotated the piston to hit it, went round the other way, hit it on the other side, and that gave us true top dead center in the center. Now, we fettled with it a bit to make sure that each degree count on each side was identical. Now, the intake centerline method on number 1 lobe, so that's the inlet lobe on number 1, is exactly the same thing. Of course, here's our cam here. It's not really that pointy. Now, all we're doing with this is we're rotating the camshaft past the opening side to the closing side, down 100 thousandths, and then we come back 50 thousandths and make a mark on the degree wheel. Then continue rotating it back past the highest points of the other side, which gives us another mark on the degree wheel, and we take an average, and that gives us the intake center line. And that's what I'm going to show you now. Now, this is dodgy. Don't do it like this. I've got a magnet set up on the sort of inner part of the lifter, which is the wrong way to do it, but I've already set it up with the dial indicator on the very edge of the lifter, if you know what I mean, because that's a nice solid part. But I'm doing it like this because you couldn't really see the dial indicator face too well, and I think this is a bit clearer to sort of show you. So I'm going to rotate the crank until I get to the very top of the lift, which is there. So I'm just going to zero it. Right, so that's the very top. Now I'm going to go past this 100 thousandths, like that. That's 105. Then go back to 50. Oh, there. And of course now I'm going to put a mark on the degree wheel, which is 148. And then we do the same thing the other way. So we're going to go back to the top and then back again to 50 thousandths. you shouldn't go like that. I needed a longer bar. And that mark is 65 here. So we add those two together, 150, 148, sorry, and 65, which is 213. And we divide that by 2, which gives us 106.5. Now the lobe center line on this is supposed to be 106, so we're right on the money. So that's really good. Now, after we've done that, I'm going to get back onto the base circle of the cam lobe, which is the part where obviously is at the bottom, not on the pointy bit, and go all the way down. And once I get to the bottom, I'm going to zero the dial indicator again. Back a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to see when it gets to 6,000ths. And I'm going to take a reading on the degree wheel, and that should coincide with what the cam card says in terms of when the inlet valve is supposed to open. There. Now that was actually about half a degree out, so I'm just going to go back a little bit there, and then we'll mark that on the wheel, and that should coincide with what the cam card says. If I can find my green texter for where the where it's supposed to open, and it's saying there 27.5. So it's opening 27.5 after top dead center. If I look at the sheet here, 27 is when it's supposed to open. Now this is tricky because these ones measure 6,000ths after it starts moving, if you know what I mean. So it measures 6,000ths off the base circle. Now a lot of camshafts, I know the one in the XW, I had to measure at 50,000ths, and that's quite common. 50 seems to be the golden number. This is 6, so it's a bit different. It threw me at the start. So I'm going to go back and turn it till I can see when it closes, and that should be right on the money as well. And if that's the case, I can call it a day. Process of CCing. I want to know how much room's in here. There's 2 big valve reliefs, and also in using a straight edge. Well, this isn't really a straight edge, it's an engineer's rule. You can see there's quite a lot of room under there, so they didn't take much off this block. They skimmed it just as I asked them to, but I just hope that compression height isn't lower than what the original one was. So I'm going to check that now. And of course, I'm referring to my very, very amateurish CCing equipment. That's just a bit of 3mm acrylic, plexi if you like. It's got 2 holes in it. I'm just going to use a bit of grease to seal around the cylinder bore and fill it up with this 50cc syringe. With very fine oil. So you can use other liquids as well, coolant and that sort of thing, but I don't want water in here, so I'm just going to use a very fine oil. I'm just going to put a very thin application of grease around here. I don't want it taking up any room in the cylinder bore. I just want to get it around the edge so that when I put this oil in, it doesn't run out. And this is really homemade. I haven't got a proper burret or anything like that for it, but I've done this quite a few times, and it's proven to be really good. It gives me a good indication anyway. Right, so we'll put that on. And in this syringe, I have 50 cc's of really, really thin oil. So I think we're ready to go. So I'm just going to pop that in there. Start putting it in. I'm just going to take a reading off the syringe once I'm finished, just to see how much is left. There's a bubble there I can see, which isn't great. Right, so we put 50 in the syringe. There's 35.5 cc's left, which means the volume in here is 14.5 cc's, which is pretty good. I thought it'd be more than that, but it's not, so that's cool. All I've got to do now is dig out the cylinder head and start CCing that, and I can work out the compression ratio. So that was fairly amateurish, but at the end of the day, I've got some data now which I needed. This is very amateurish, actually. It's just a bit of plexi, as I said before. Had a bit of trouble getting this. That's a 60cc syringe. Went to the chemist and give me one. They probably thought it was going to shoot up or something, although that's the sort of thing you give a horse, I guess. But the woman at work gave me that, and of course that's just out of a fish tank filter. So it's just a matter of, I put that in so it doesn't overflow everywhere, but that's basically all it is. It's dodgy, but I reckon it's all right. You can take the degree wheel off. Whoa, there we go. And the last thing I want to do is to just mock up this pointer, which goes, I think, here. It's pretty dirty, this thing, but I've given it a very quick clean, and then I can sort of ascertain whether the mark on the balancer lines up. And of course, we just wind this on with a shifter. When I was on the bench, we used to refer to these things as the AFS, which means any effing size. So that's not quite right because it's 2 degrees out. I'll check the other new balancer. This is the one I sort of refurbished, so to speak. This is a sensational tool. This is my brother's. You can tell it's my brother's because it's got its own little Torrington bearing. Mine's one of those cheap little Lyle ones from way back in the 1980s. So I'm just going to pull this off now. It's just so easy to use. It's much better than the other ones. And again, the bearing sort of gives you feel, and so you really know what you're doing and what you're up against when you use tools like this. It's worth the extra investment. And of course, it just has that little thing that guides itself in. So of course, those threads are all protected. It's brilliant. So we've put some assembly lube on the outside of that eccentric and also on the inside of it as well. We'll just button this up to 45 foot-pounds. Someone corrected me over that. They said feet-pounds or something. But and so we've got a timing cover. It's nice and clean. Bit mangy on the outside where the water pump was, but it is still serviceable, so I'm going to use it. And I'm just going to plonk that on, stick a couple of bolts on. And this is good because when I come to paint the engine, I'll just, I'll put it in there. I'll just paint it. It'll mask off these areas nicely. Then, of course, just take it off and fit gaskets and all that sort of stuff. But I've had enough for one day. I reckon that's a good day's work. So I'll get back into it later in the week. Right, well, I want to take a look at the oil pump and associated bits and pieces. And of course, the first thing I want to look at is the drive. And straight off the bat, we've got here 351 Cleveland, 400M and so forth. So I'm just going to take it out of here. And underneath this thing is an instruction leaflet. And again, we have to look at that because there are some clearances that we need to consider with that. So there we are. We've got our new drive. There, I suppose. And of course, first thing I want to do is make sure they're the same length, which they are. And I'm going to knock this collar down just level with that one there, so that that's a good way or a good place to begin. Of course, the purpose of that collar is to stop the drive sitting in the bottom of the distributor and withdrawing with it and vacating the oil pump part. So I'm just going to knock that down. Of course, to do that, I'm just going to plop a deep socket on top and knock it down. That's not far off there. Maybe a tiny bit more, but not terribly much. And so I've got that round about where I want it to be. Of course, it's always prudent to make sure it is the right size and it fits, which it does. That's perfect in there. And also on the actual pump itself. And the pump comes with its own gasket, which is a very, very thin gasket. So I'll dummy fit the pump before I put that on. I've got another one in the engine gasket kit. And of course, here's our standard volume pump here. And that fits well. So that's good. The good thing about a Cleveland actually is these pumps are self-priming. Some of the Holden V8s and some of the Rover V8s are a bit of a pain, in that they don't self-prime. You've got to sort of stuff them full of Vass or whatever they use. But so being the genius I am, I've actually slashed through the instruction leaflet here that came with the drive. But basically all it's saying is you need to have 8 to 10 thousandths clearance, as in shaft end plane, which is determined by that collar. And you need 50 thousandths clearance, so a bit over a mil and a quarter, between here, the drive shaft, which is wider than the standard one, and the crankshaft counterweight. So that's about all that says. You'll also have it's got a little up arrow, so that, now of course we knew it went to the distributor because of that clip, but that's the way it faces sort of up that way in the block. So I'm going to go and dummy fit this on and see where that takes us. So the shaft sort of fits down between this counterweight here into where the distributor thing is, so we need to really keep an eye on that. And of course I'm just going to put it into the bottom of the oil pump. I'm not using a gasket yet. I'm just going to stick a bolt in somewhere, which is there. Got to start the thing. I'm on a bad angle, and I'll just tentatively do it up by hand for now. And look, a lot of these measurements wouldn't be necessary, but because this engine's made up of loads and loads of aftermarket parts, including this oil pump, I want to make sure that everything fits properly, because you only get sort of one chance when you do stuff like this. And it's got an absolute truckload of clearance there. I just need to get around the other side and take a look. Right, so what we're looking at is, which is the best way to hold the light? The clearance between the counterweight, the block, everything around there, just to make sure that when we flick this thing around, it's not going to foul against anything. Now it does get a little bit close on the sort of end boss part, and it's very, very difficult to see around it, but we've got more than 10,000 clearance. They want 10,000 as a minimum, but I think that's all good. I might have to use a little mirror and have a look down there. A lot of the time when you're restoring cars and playing with engines, those little capillary cameras you get, I can't remember what they're called. I ordered one for this when I was doing rust repairs, and it never showed up. But they're a good idea. Just have a good peer around just to make sure everything's clearing properly. So we fit our oil pickup in the pump and we tighten it down. I would have preferred to use this. This is a much nicer one. That's out of the Junkyard 302. But it's striking on the pump body here. You can see a little mark there. And the last thing we'll do is scrape it through. But this one's not quite as nice. It's still very clean inside. Just not quite as nice, but we're going to tighten this up now. But as I said, you know, a lot of people will probably think it's a little bit overkill. But because we're using non-genuine parts throughout, it doesn't hurt to check everything. We want to get that pickup level. I'm just going to use a large pair of multis just in here and just sort of tease it over a bit, just so it looks nice and level against the rails there. And this camera's on a bit of an angle. I'm going to pull it out the way so I can really look along it in a moment. And of course we can put the pan on. We can check the clearance between here and the pan with a bit of plasticine or blue tack. We're looking for about 3/8 of an inch clearance. But for now, I can check that later. We can stick this on, and I'm not going to put gaskets in yet. At the end of the day, this will just keep it protected until we're ready to do a bit more work on it. Of course, the other thing we need to do preparing for the future is finding a drive that'll fit. I think it's the blue one, yeah. So this can be used to prime the oil pump with the cordless drill. Of course, we'll fill the oil filter up and fill the sump up when we're ready, and we'll turn that, and that'll get our oil pressure up. So it's getting tools ready, just seeing what we've got for the future. So we're not finished by any stretch, but we're a little bit further ahead than what we were before. That is it for this chapter. I've got to get valve springs before I put the heads on. And once the heads are on, we can paint it and start dressing it, do the valve lash, all that sort of stuff. But until then, drive safely, enjoy your classic, and I'll see you later. Ta-da!